Have you ever watched a trailer for an upcoming patch and thought, gimme, now? Because that's me right now. It looks like we will be eating good during 4.0. There is so much that was teased in the trailer, from a mysterious prophecy to the traveler becoming a wanted criminal. Shocking, right? Child being visionless. But what really got my attention was the Oratrice, a machine that farms the people's belief in justice and uses it to generate a kind of energy called indemnitium. The real kicker is that it is conscious. I believe this will be the focal plot point of the Fontaine chapter, and based on past information, we can begin to speculate on how the story will play out. So what if I told you that the Oratrice may be the Lord of Amrita, the previous Hydro Archon, and that Focalors may have stolen her divinity in order to ascend to godhood? Sounds crazy? Well, it may be more likely than you think, so sit back and let me guide you through my thought process. Before that though, just a quick disclaimer, this is highly speculative. I'm only going off past game content under new light and the crumbs we were given in the trailer, so like always, take everything with a massive grain of salt. So, we got this new combat mechanic for Fontaine characters, the Arc. It consists of two opposing kinds of energies, Pneuma and Ousia. When these two meet, they generate an annihilation reaction, which in turn generates energy. Now, if you remember, we already knew that Fontaine had two different energy systems that were unique to the nation. We also knew that one of them was in decline for some reason. Given that the Arc is built into the characters, it is safe to assume it is here to stay, and therefore it is Indemnitium that is running into some trouble. We will get to that eventually, for now just keep it at the back of your mind. For now, let us try to decipher what the Arc even is. At some point in the trailer, we see this green light emanating from a building. This reminds me of the schematic found within René's notes. If you have played Girdle of the Sands, that's a name that should sound familiar. René was a scholar from Fontaine that studied the machines and technology of Conria. 500 years ago, when a cataclysm was presumably still going on, as he was still hoping for the return of the vice-director, he, a boy named Jacob, and a fellow by the name of Mr. Carl went on an expedition to the Vorokasha oasis, where their Vistcom is located. Vistcom? Yeah, that, you know what I'm talking about. This is a sacred place for the Pari because it was where the remains of the Lord of Amrita came to rest. When she was slain, her body turned into pure dew, the Amrita. However, she had been corrupted with abyssal energy, making her unable to be reborn into a purer plane. And thus, Rukkhadevata created a tree from the Amrita to keep her consciousness anchored to the mortal realm. Said consciousness is said to reside within the Gaukarena, a giant lotus. This is the same flower that René is referring to when he writes about the sacred lotus. He states, "The structure of the so-called sacred lotus is similar to the composition of mine and Jacob's bodies, yet it has almost no common properties with that of Mr. Carl." It soon becomes obvious that he's talking about the energetic composition because he goes on to compare the Kvarena to elemental energy. Listen to this. Compared to the powers of the elements, the power of Kvarena is actually more similar to redacted. It assimilates whatever materials and energies it comes into contact with. Though the Kvarena is opposed to the energy of redacted, it does similarly have a form of self-recognition. On this point, the two possess the same properties. We know that the Kvarena is opposed to abyssal energy and forbidden knowledge. From there, we can assume that the redacted words are abyssal energy, meaning that even though the Kvarena is opposed to such an energy, it still shares more similarities with it than with elemental energy. But at the end of the day, it is neither. If you think about it, the Kvarena we have now is a product of three different gods. Nabu Malikata created the original Kvarena, who she called her pure daughter. That one was just Nabu's energy or essence in its purest form. Later, Rukkhadevata fashioned her into Simurgh, adding her energy into the mix. Later still, this divine bird shattered its form in the pool of Amrita, giving rise to the Pari, so they are also made of the Lord of Amrita's essence. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky. When René talks about the composition of the sacred lotus, if you read the whole thing, which I will link in the description, it becomes apparent that he is implying it is abyssal in nature. Mr. Carl seems to oppose the use of such an energy because he believes it to be evil, while René states that power is neither good nor bad, it just is. The Gaukarena being made up of abyssal energy seems to really complicate things even though it makes sense. Remember that the only reason why the Lord of Amrita couldn't be reborn was because she was corrupted. But now you may be thinking, when the Kvarena withers from being in too much contact with the energies it opposes, it goes back to the Amrita, where it is nourished. So it can't be abyssal, right? Well, remember how Simurgh just shattered when she came into contact with the pool of Amrita? That is a very strong opposing reaction right there. Almost like an annihilation reaction. However, we have been told that the Kvarenda just assimilates whatever energies it comes into contact with. Simurgh was made strictly of the more elemental energies of Nabu and Rukkhadevata, but the Peri already assimilated the energy of the Lord of Amrita, meaning that if they incorporated abyssal energy into themselves, they would no longer have such a strong opposing reaction to it anymore. Essentially, the Pari are a less reactive form of energy. And we know that both abyssal and elemental energies have different forms with different levels of reactivity. For instance, memories and elemental energy are just two sides of the same coin. They are both collected by Irminsul, and gods can convert one into the other. Have we not seen gods expend too much elemental power and lose their memories as a consequence more than once? Similarly, if one was to gather pure elemental energy, they would obtain azozite. The color probably puts you in mind of the light element we saw the twins use, but while they used it in a rather explosive manner, azozite is remarkably stable and can be used as an energy source. Remember the schematic I mentioned? Yeah, this is what the Conrians use to power those machines. When it comes to abyssal energy, it works in a similar way. Forbidden knowledge is likely a very destructive form of abyssal energy, as the dark mud found in the chasm is forbidden knowledge that got altered when it came into contact with the divine nail. So, if elemental energy can be safely used for energy production in a more stable form, it is also possible that the same can be done for abyssal energy. René went back to Fontaine after his expedition to implement his findings. It is likely that he copied the Canrians' usage of elements and then added abyssal energy into the mix, which is what Mr. Carl seemed to be opposed to. So Numa and Ozia are just elemental energy and abyssal energy in a more stable form. In that order, judging by the colors. Also, since we need both types of arc for exploration, we need to be provided with a free unit of each type. Since Lynette is an Ozia user, that implies that the Traveler will be a Numa user, which makes perfect sense when you remember once again how much azozite, pure elemental energy, looks like their original power. It makes sense they would be aligned with it. But that leads us to another question. How are some people aligned with one, while others are aligned with the other? René implied that both he and Jacob had a more abyssal constitution, while Mr. Carl had a more elemental one. So far, we only had knowledge about it being normal for one to have some amount of elemental energy within their bodies, as Eleazar was created by an unnatural amount of it. So either these two got corrupted by being the presence of the Amrita, or they were always naturally composed of abyssal energy. That's a fun thought, because it could potentially explain why the pure-blooded Conrians were affected in different ways. If they were naturally more aligned with the Abyss, it would make sense for them to turn into monsters, no? Okay, so let's roll with the assumption that Ozia is abyssal energy and Numa is elemental energy. What now? Are they responsible for things going south in the land of Hydra? The people are losing their memories. Is it because these two energies are running rampant due to the arc system? We see the Traveler clutching their head in the trailer, which is something we have only seen them do when exposed to high concentrations of energy. But I don't think it's because of the arc. Remember that Ozia and Numa are likely stable energy forms, not to mention that they have been in use for close to half a millennium. And again, this system is built into the gameplay. The energy source that is malfunctioning has to be in the Amnesium. And for what it's worth, I do believe that it is Focalors and the Oratrice that are causing all of these problems. So let's talk a little bit about it. The first thing of note is that the Oratrice is conscious, which isn't all that weird. Consciousness can be artificially created in Tevat. Think about Scaramouche, the Raiden Shogun, Catherine, or even Albedo. However, from what little we have seen, it doesn't appear that Fontaine's machines and automatons are conscious, making the Oratrice an exception. The second thing is that it is capable of dishing out accurate judgments. And third, it feeds on the people's belief in justice, just like, according to Nahida, the archons feed on their people's faith. Who am I kidding? You watched the intro, you know what I'm getting at. The Oratrice is likely a part of the Lord of Amrita's consciousness. But wait, isn't her consciousness in the Calcarena? How could she be here? And how does Focalors tie into all of this? Well, my dear lore enthusiasts, this is where we need to look at the etymology of the word Amrita. It is a Sanskrit word that translates into not death or immortality. However, it is also associated with the Greek concept of ambrosia, the drink of the gods. So you can think of the Amrita as the drink of immortality. We know that beings can ascend into godhood in different ways. Would it really be that far-fetched to say that Focalors became a god by drinking from the pool of Amrita? We have some information that may actually support this. Keep in mind that we are rolling with the assumption that the Amrita is still very much contaminated with abyssal energy. In the ongoing event, Idiot told us that after Focalors became the Hydro Archon, the very waters changed and became filled with pain and hatred, making the Oceanids fear for their very lives. Now that sounds like abyssal corruption, does it not? There is also the fact that Focalors seems to go out of her way to convince others that her ideals are stainless, that she is pure. But the eyes of her vessel, Furina, may tell another story. She has heterochromia, with one light blue, hydro-like eye and another darker blue eye, which resembles the color of Ozia. Since the arc system isn't tied down to the divisions, Furina is probably also aligned with one of the two types of energy. If I had to guess, I'd say she is Ozia aligned. So Focalors isn't stainless, she is the stain. Abyssal corruption festers over time, which might be why things are only now getting to a critical point in Fontaine. Like I said, Ozia and Numa are stable enough to not cause problems, but Furina's corruption isn't, and it may be spreading to her nation and people, including to the Traveler. Cue the headache. Focalors is probably very aware of what is going on, which is why she seeks to not make an enemy of the Divine. Celestia has struck against the Abyss before, after all, so instead of passing judgment herself, she relies on the Oratrice, the consciousness of which she likely acquired in her trip to the Vorukasha Oasis. An Archon's godly ideal seems to be passed down to their successor. Both Nahida and Rukkhadevata were gods of wisdom, just like Ei and Makoto were both gods of eternity, meaning that the Lord of Amrita was most likely also a god of justice. By taking part of her consciousness and putting it into the Oratrice, Focalors could create the perfect judge without being directly implicated. Why do I think this happened? Remember Egeria? We only got to hear her voice during the Overture teaser, The Final Feast, where she talked about sin and judgment in the form of sinking. She's named after the goddess of fountains, who was said to have the gift of prophecy. Remember the whole prophecy about people dissolving? Yeah. This makes me think there are two possibilities for her identity. Either she is another Oceanid, or she is the Lord of Amrita. I'm leaning towards the second option because we might have heard her again during As Light Rain Falls Without Reason. Pay attention to this.
Wait. Who am I?
That might or might not be Egeria making a second appearance, but one way or another, I do feel like it might be the consciousness of the Lord of Amrita. For one, this scene takes place underwater, but not in the real world. I mean, the Traveler just standing there, menacingly. This reminds me of when the Traveler connected themselves to Nahida's consciousness. And for two, look at this thing. Does it not look a little bit like the Gaukerena? Sure, the color isn't a perfect match and the camera pan makes it look like this being has eyes, so an animal instead of a flower, but there are definite similarities, right? This might be a little bit of the Gaukerena, a little bit of the consciousness of the Lord of Amrita that Focalors stole from the Oasis. As the OG god of justice, she would have been powering the Oratrice for the past 500 years, allowing it to make accurate judgments, though she likely wasn't truly conscious before, as she seems to just be waking up. Now, during the trailer, we were told that the current justice system is a joke and that Focalors places her cold, hard rules above her very people. We also know that the death penalty is a thing and you can get it for poaching, so you can probably get it from other offenses as well. The Lord of Amrita was already contaminated, but if Focalors' own corruption has been festering, it may be directly impacting the Oratrice, leading it to dish out harsher punishments than usual and making Indemnitium no longer a stable source of energy. So Focalors may play a completely different role from the Archons that came before, and the Traveler may end up having to purify both her and the past Hydro Archon. Do remember this is highly speculative, but I personally feel like it could make for a very interesting arc. But what do you think? Is the Lord of Amrita still around? And is Focalors the problem? Please let me know your theories about 4.0. I am very excited to read everyone's take on it. That's all for today. My name is Blue, and I'll see you again soon. Safe journey, travelers!